everyone, I'm Stephanie. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. And this is the Get Literate podcast. Each week, we mix together books, notebooks, mindful practices, and creativity to cultivate a life we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme, and we'll bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through. Now, let's grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, Stephanie here, welcoming you to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. Let's begin with a breath. We made it. We made it through the holidays, and I hope that you just didn't make it through, but you loved it, you enjoyed it, you savored it, and that your holiday was everything that you wanted and needed it to be. But I find what comes next to be fascinating. The world literally seems to switch instantly from holiday to holiday. And the craziness of the Christmas season seems to switch in a blink to getting ready for the new year. Planning the New Year's parties, doing lots of goal setting, getting out your visioning board. All of it seems to change so quickly. For some, the week after the holiday can feel a little bit like a letdown, like an exhaustion, like dealing with the aftermath of a holiday. But that's not the case for me. I actually love the week after Christmas. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year. It's like a week that's suspended in time. The kids are all home from school. I don't have any work on the horizon. And it's just a week to just be, to decompress, to relax, to do nothing, or at least close to nothing. I often spend the week, yes, you guessed it, doing some extra reading and writing, but like everybody else, the week is filled with reflection and thinking about new possibilities for the new year. And especially since I've been doing that 30-day journaling challenge from Alex Benayan as part of my Get Literate community, it's thinking about what goals I want to set in the new year based on what I've learned about myself at the end of this year. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, that really powerful 3 questions a day journaling challenge, you can head to episode 28 and listen. Now, side note, I tend to fill that week with lots of cleaning of closets too, right? We get all this stuff and it just gives me an urge to clear out the old stuff and make room for the new. Now, since my reading life is a really large part of my actual life, I do spend time this week not just reading and enjoying my reading, but reflecting on my reading life across the year so that I can think about the goals I might want to set in the coming year. Now, how successful I am at that reflection during the week depends upon a couple of things, but it depends squarely on how well I've kept track of my reading in the year before. And this year, I nailed it. I had 3 points of data to consider about my reading life. First was my bookish spreadsheet. It is actually my favorite way to digitally track my reading because it lets me enter in my titles, my ratings, my genres, the audience, the format of the book. It lets me enter all that data in. And then Google magically puts it into these beautiful graphics for me to take a look at, and it points out the patterns that I need to see. Now, I've also tracked my reading on Goodreads. One of my values in my reading life is to share that reading life with others, obviously. And so I use Goodreads to post my reviews and see what my friends are reading and even join in some of those Goodreads conversations. And the third way I've kept track of my reading is a newer way. And you know about this because I've talked about it on the podcast before, but it's a way to really dig into what I'm learning from my books. And that's my book journal. It allows me to put how the book is touching my heart, the quotes I want to hang on to, the life lessons that I'm learning, and how the book is actually changing my life. So between those three things, my bookish spreadsheet, my Goodreads account, and my book journal, I've done a pretty good job keeping track of my reading life in 2022. Now, if you want your own bookish spreadsheet, then you can head to the show notes and download mine for free. I'm actually updating it for the 2023 year, so more to come on that. We can be friends on Goodreads, and you can head to the show notes if you want to take a closer peek at my book journal. So, armed with all of this bookish data, how do I reflect on my reading life and how do I set goals for the coming year? That's what I want to do today. I want to walk you through my reading stats, and I want to walk you through my reading reflections for 2022, and then think forward about what our goals for 2023 might be. And because we always mention books on this podcast, I've got a couple of recommendations at the end for short books to read during this week in between the holidays and the new year to hold your attention, to help you decompress, and yes, maybe to bump up those reading stats if that's something that's important to you. So let me begin with a disclaimer, right? I do a lot of reading in this week between Christmas and New Year's, but I'm recording this at the very beginning of the week. So my stats that I'm sharing today are based at this particular moment in time, and I will update them and let you know the final numbers and the final count on social media and in my Facebook group for the podcast. So without further ado, let's get going to the reading stats that came straight from my personal bookish spreadsheet. So how many books did I read this year? Drum roll, please. 113 books. That is a staggering number for me. Right? We are all busy. We work full-time, we work side hustles, we have kids, we have lives. The fact that we're able, or I am able to fill that time with 113 books gives me a lot of pride. I know for some, you're thinking, oh my goodness, how did she read that many books? And I also know for others, you're thinking 113, I totally passed that at the end of the summer. So the number doesn't really matter as much to me. I am definitely a reader for quality and not quantity, although I do love that I hit the triple digits this year because I did not hit triple digits last year. But when we look at the stats, when I look at my spreadsheet and I look at those beautiful graphics, there are other numbers that I want to know. Yes, I read 113 books and I'm going to celebrate. But what I really want to know if those 113 books actually mattered. Were they something that made my reading life better, that made my actual life better, that made me have the kind of reading life and actual life that I want to have? So these are the more refined stats that I want to dig into. Now, when I look at my genres, over 50% of the books that I've read were realistic fiction, and that is not surprising to me. Realistic fiction is my favorite. I love to get lost in a book, but I love to get lost in a book that could be reality, right? So family sagas, family dramas, friendships, experiencing things that maybe could happen to me and maybe couldn't. I just love getting into the heads of other characters. So 50% realistic fiction, a little bit over actually, wasn't surprising to me. Now, the rest of the 50% was a bit of a hot mess, a little bit of everything. I did have about 15% nonfiction, and in my case, that was all self-help books. I love personal development books. And then the rest of the percentage, about 35%, was scattered between historical fiction, memoirs, fantasy, poetry, and picture books. So I'm really pleased with those numbers because I want to read the things that I want to read while I still want to read things that are going to push my reading boundaries. So I'm really happy that I leaned into what makes my reading heart happy, which is realistic fiction, but about 50% of the rest of my reading was taken with lots of other genres. Now, when I look at who those books were written for, I'm pretty happy with this next stat to share with you too. About 57% of the books that I read were adult books. These were books that were written for adults, whether it was those self-help books or those realistic fiction books. Authors wrote to adults, and I read about 57% of that. The rest of it, a little less than 50%, was spent on children's literature. So picture books, middle grade novels, young adult titles. Now, yes, I am a teacher educator and I teach a class on children's literature. So you would expect that my reading life would have a pretty heavy amount of kid lit in it. But even if I wasn't, I really think it's so important for adults to read children's literature. And there's so many reasons why I think that. You can head to my blog post on my website of why. But I think it helps us connect with our inner child. I think it helps us reflect on our own childhoods. And I think it better helps us connect with kids today and the books they're reading. Whether we are a teacher trying to boost their reading life, or we're just a mom, a dad, a caregiver, or a family friend, knowing what kids are reading today and using those books to make those connections, that can make all the difference in the world, whether a child grows up to be a reader or a scroller. Okay, so now let's think about the format of the books. I read 75% of my books in print. 25% of my books were digital ebooks and 0% were audiobooks. I'm almost afraid to admit that because one of my goals for 2022 was to finally start listening to audiobooks. And I failed, like literally failed, not a single book. But I do have a plan for that in 2023. I do have a list of books that I am going to listen to because they are memoirs that have been narrated by the author. I have heard that that is a way into the audiobook world for someone like me who finds it more difficult to listen and concentrate on a story. Gretchen Rubin also shared another tip where she only listens to books that she has previously read before. So it's more of an enhanced reading experience and not the first time trying to make sense of the story. And I think I would love to do that too. Take some of my favorites, whether they were adult books or children's literature, and go ahead and listen and reread those books that way. So that's a goal of mine. And hopefully saying it out loud to the world right now will hold me a bit more accountable than I must not have felt last year. Okay, next up is something that I am pretty disappointed with in myself, and that is how diverse my reading was. My goal has always been to read 50% of books that have been written by authors who are not like me. Right? So we talk about diverse books. We want to read books by Black, Indigenous, people of color, of BIPOC authors. Basically, I want to read to broaden my ideas of the world. And I can't broaden my ideas of the world if I am only reading books that have been written by people who look and think like me. So this year, I fell short of my 50-50 goal. 70% of the books I read were not from diverse authors who are not like me, only 30%. And that bothers me because that was a goal I had coming into the year. And it's really important to me. It's important to me as an adult who is just trying to be better and who's trying to figure out how the world works for other people and what my place might be in it. But it's also important to me as a mom, as an educator, as a teacher educator who is recommending books to others. And I want to make sure that my recommendations are not biased by what I like and how I feel and what I might be most comfortable with. I want it to be something that we can all relate to, that everybody can see themselves in the books. And that more importantly, almost, at least to me at this point, I want to be able to see someone who's not like me so that I can learn. I can get that empathy. I can be a better person. So that's something that I definitely plan to work on in 2023. Now, the other thing that just makes me giggle when I look when I look at the pictures on my bookish spreadsheet is my book ratings. So over 100 of my books, I rated them as 5-star reads. Seriously. Now, I have a reason for that. I have a big problem with star ratings. As someone who has written 2 books for teachers, and as someone who reads their reviews that they get, who feels those reviews and who knows how those reviews impact the reach that a book has, I have a real problem. I struggle with the stars because the book could be beautifully well written, but it just wasn't right for me at that time. Who am I to rate it a 3 because I picked it up at the wrong time instead of rating it a 5 6 months later when that's the book that I needed to read? So I go into each and every book expecting it to be a 5-star read. And for me, a 5-star read is a book that I've enjoyed, a book that has touched my heart, a book that I have learned from, a book that I want to share with someone else. All of those things qualify it as a 5-star read. And all of you inside my Get Literate community, you know that it's been something that I've been working on. Maybe not rating everything 5 stars, but I've decided that I'm not going to worry about it. And that's actually why in my book journal, I shifted to rating things with hearts instead of stars, so that I'm truly only rating the impact that the book had on me, not necessarily the writing or things that might be clouded by my personal emotional reaction to the book. So that's kind of a sorry, not sorry kind of thing. I started the year wanting to think a little bit more carefully about my 5-star reviews and what they meant, but I ended the year just deciding to value 5 heart reviews instead. Now, last up, I found out that over 50% of the books that I've read were because of online recommendations. And online included social media. It included books shared from my Get Literate Patreon community. It included books that I've learned about on other podcasts or YouTube videos. Most of my book recommendations, over 50%, came from online sources. And that's actually something that I want to change. I want to get more of my book recommendations from friends, from family, and especially booksellers. I want to immerse myself more in that bookseller world as I'm really leaning into the fun of this bookish podcast. And so that is going to be a goal of mine in 2023. And in fact, I've got a really fun challenge for myself. It's my own version of Gretchen Rubin's 23 and 23 that I'm not going to tell you yet, because that's going to be an upcoming podcast episode in January. But just know that my 23 and 23 challenge is going to tackle this. How do I find my next book to read? And how can I rely less on online sources and more on personal connections with families, friends, and especially booksellers? So all of that to say, I had a really great reading year, right? I loved it. Not only did I have a really great reading year reading, but creating this podcast and sharing my reading life and my writing life with others has just been wonderful. And I can't wait to continue in 2023. So my goals are to stay true to what my reading heart loves, which is realistic fiction. Keep that about 50%, but keep broadening the rest of the genres that I read. I'm going to keep myself balanced in 2023, reading about half of adult literature and half of children's literature. I am going to attempt to up my listening game and read at least a couple of books as audiobooks. I'm going to make a much better effort to diversify my reading life and have at least a 50-50 balance. So I am reading books written by authors who are not like me. And I'm going to work really hard to get my next book recommendations from places other than the online world, but more strengthened bookish connections. So all of that just from the stats and the graphics of my Google spreadsheet, my bookish spreadsheet. But now that we've got all of that data, we've got those numbers, and I'm really thinking about how my reading life was in 2022 and where I want to take it in 2023, it's time for some real reflection. And by real, I mean emotional. I mean feelings. I mean deep, right? The numbers can tell us one thing, but we need to interpret them. We need to feel them. And so there are 3 questions that I ask after I've looked at my log, I've looked at my Goodreads, wonderful stats that comes to my email. I look at my book journal. After I look at all of those numbers and the stats, I ask myself 3 questions. And I'm going to bet with 100% certainty that you have not heard these 3 reflective questions before. They're not from anyone else. I didn't borrow them from another podcaster or blogger. These are truly the 3 questions that I ask myself after I've gone through the numbers. Here they are. Number 1, thinking back on the past year as we reflect, how did I want my reading life to feel? Right? Beyond numbers, beyond stats, how did you want your reading life to feel? Did you want it to feel consistent? Did you want it to feel expansive and read a lot of different books, genres, authors, formats? Did you want it to feel like an escape? Did you want it to feel like it was productive and lean more into nonfiction? Did you want your reading life to feel more creative and lean into poetry or verse? How did I want my reading life to feel? For me, I wanted 3 things. Number 1, I always have wanted to use my reading life as an escape. I wanted to just get lost in someone else's world and inside the heads of other characters that were not my own. I also wanted my reading life to feel expansive, to feel like I was broadening not just what I was reading, but the kind of person that I was becoming. And I want my reading life to feel like I'm learning, whether that's through hardcore nonfiction or more likely personal development books. I wanted to use those books as catalysts to learn about things that interested me in my actual life so that maybe I could give them a try and, of course, make my life more better, interesting, happier, creative in the process. So I wanted my reading life to feel like an escape. I wanted it to feel expansive and broaden what I was thinking. And I wanted to really be explicit and to learn something new that I could give a try. So there's the first question. How did I want my reading life to feel? Number 2, this is my favorite. I wrote about this in my book, Leading Literate Lives, a book that helps teachers ignite a love of reading and writing in their students. And this is always teachers and students' favorites question. You ready? It is, if my books could talk, what would they say? Right? So if my 113 books could get together and have a little chat about what my reading life says about who I am and the kind of person I am and the values that I have and the things that I want to do, what would they say? Right? That's when the numbers come in. They would say that I love getting lost in other people's drama because I love realistic fiction. They would say that I have an equal love for reading adult books and reading kid literature. They would say I need to listen to more audiobooks and actually give that genre a try. They would say I need to be more intentional and reading books that are written by authors who are not like me. And they might say I've got to rethink my rating scale or just get rid of it. And maybe I want to rethink how books are recommended to me too. But if my books could talk, what would they say? And then I'd add one more question to that. Is that what you want them to say? Are you happy with what those books are chatting about you? If you are, great, continue on. If you're not, what kind of changes might you make for your reading life in 2023? And then finally, the third question, maybe this one's my favorite actually, but the third question is, how has my reading life changed me? How has it changed me? Has it changed me because I've read consistently throughout the year and Research shows us that reading at least 6 minutes a day brings all of those physical, mental, emotional, and cognitive benefits. Like, did it actually change my physical, emotional, and mental health? Has my reading life changed me because I've been introduced to new authors who have broadened my thinking? Has it changed me because I've learned about new things and new hobbies that have actually expanded the things that I'm trying in my own life? Has it changed me because I leaned into personal development and now I've got a new hobby or a side hustle or a much better self-esteem? Right? You get to decide, but how has my reading life changed me? And here's the thing, our reading life should change us. Yes, we can read for fun and we can read to escape, but every book we read literally changes the way our brain operates. You can't undo what you've read, and that means you've had to make space for it up there somewhere. And thinking about how we're making space for all of this newness can help us decide how to proceed, right? So, how has my reading life changed me? So there are the questions that I asked myself this week that I reflected on, that I'm hoping as I talked about them, you were thinking about your own life too. But here's your challenge for this week. Your challenge is to take some time with your favorite beverage in your hand and a notebook and maybe a colorful pen, or what I use, a really smooth mechanical pencil. And I want you to jot down what comes to mind when you answer those 3 questions. Now, I did create a printable of these questions to help you reflect forward on your reading life as well. So I just asked, how did I want my reading life to feel? If my books could talk, what would they say? How has my reading life changed me? But I want you to think forward with these questions too as you plan for your reading life in 2023. How do I want my reading life to feel? If my books could talk, what do I want them to say? And how will my reading life change me? That's a much different way of looking at our reading goals than saying, I want to read 100 books this year. I want to read 50% audiobooks this year, right? Those are good goals, but what do we do with them? Why do they matter? So if you'd like that printable, it's a printable that looks like a journal page, so you can jot down your ideas. You can join my Patreon community. It's getliterate.co. You can get that printable along with lots of other printables and bonus episodes, live events, book clubs, all of the things. But I would love for you, regardless of if you have that printable or not, to just take some time for yourself. Look at the reading stats you have. Ask yourself those 3 questions of how you want your reading life to feel, what your books would say, and how your reading life will change you, and make a little plan about what that could look like for 2023. Let's get rid of those typical resolutions, right? We're all going to lose weight. We're going to go to the gym. How about we're just going to read in ways that make our life feel really good? That is a resolution that I can get behind much, much better. Okay, so I promised that I would end with a couple of books because, I mean, we can't go an episode without mentioning at least a couple. So I thought today would be the perfect day to share a couple of short books with you. Now, why short books? Well, we are recovering from the busy holiday. We may be tired. Our minds might not be ready to jump into something deep. So short books will fit the bill. But I also know that some of you love seeing that number creep up on your reading log. And what better way to get in all the books we can the last week of the year by finishing short books that we could read in a single sitting. So here are a couple that you might consider, and I'll let you know the one that is at the top of my TBR pile too. So up first is one of my favorite books that is a short, beautiful read, and that is I'd Rather Be Reading by Anne Bogle. Anne is the podcast creator of What Should I Read Next, as many of you know. And this book is a delightful little book. It is literally physically small, and it is filled with just these gorgeous essays about the reading life. If you are a reader, you will identify with Anne. She will inspire you, and it is a great book to read when you're thinking about your reading goals for the coming year. Now, another book that I recommend is Heating and Cooling, 52 Micro Memoirs. So this book is a very quick read. The publisher says that they are bright glimpses into a richly lived life, spanning childhood to adulthood and all of the things in between. And I just loved the concept of these micro memoirs because I could handle writing a micro memoir. And I loved using this as a mentor text for my own writing. And the pages just flew by because they are short and sweet and to the point and so powerful. Now, another one is by a loved author by many. Many know him from Beartown, a book that is on my TBR list too. And that book is And Every Morning, the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer. And this is a short book about an elderly man's struggle to hold on to his memories and his family's efforts to care for him. So it might not be a book that you pick up right now because it is some deep thinking. There are some concepts here that might be hard for many, but it is a touching book. And it's a book that might be perfect to read after the holiday season. And it's short, so it's going to have a somewhat of a full circle ending fairly quickly. Now I've got two more for you. One more is a very short story called Zecora, and that's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this is a short story that I loved. It is about a high-powered Nigerian lawyer whose boyfriend left her when she found out she was pregnant. That's how the story starts off. And this high-powered woman starts to think about a whole bunch of things, especially this idea of motherhood and what it might entail. And as she prepares for motherhood, she starts to have a better understanding of her own mother's decisions, how they work together, how they think together, and the wishes that our mom has for herself and her newborn baby, or almost newborn baby. So it's a short story packed with a lot of emotion and a lot of family connections. Now, one more. You can tell I've abandoned this idea of three, but one more, and this is the one that is on the top of my TBR list for this week. It is one of the most highly recommended books when you Google short fiction stories, best short fiction stories. This comes up on just about everybody's list. And this is The Interpreter of Maladies by Jahumpa Lahiri, if I am saying that right. It's a collection of 9 short stories. And I know I love this author because this author wrote, I believe it's called The Cover of Books. No. The Clothing of Books. And it's a deep dive into how a book cover comes to be, how and why those book covers change across editions, across countries, and all of the cultural influences of designing a book cover. It's really fascinating. So I know I love this author, and this was, again, it was very highly rated, and so I can't wait to dive into this short story collection as we go through the week. So there you have it. I really hope that you take some time in this little bonus week between the holiday and New Year's to take stock on your reading life. Look at your reading stats, ask yourself those 3 very unique questions, and use it to help you plan a reading life in 2023 that you're going to love. And don't forget, you can join me on Patreon at getliterate.co to download your journal printable, and then join us for some discussions on what our reading and our writing goals might be for 2023. But if you're not inside that community, you can let me know on social media. Just tag me at @AfinitoLit on all of your favorite platforms. And if you're not a member of my free podcast Facebook group, then you can search for the Get Literate Facebook group online, and you can join us and let us know what your goals are there. So I hope you enjoy this week. I hope you rest. I hope you relax. I hope you read. I hope you reflect. And I will see you here for another episode next week. Happy reading. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing lives, like bonus podcast episodes, book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. But one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and no bookish community too. Thanks so much for listening.